Hello and welcome everyone to Season 5 of the Womenpreneur Asia podcast, and I'm your host, Krista Goon. And before we get started on the actual episodes that will start airing next Friday, I wanted to do a special introduction to Season 5 by announcing a very interesting piece of news. So just a couple of weeks ago, I checked my podcast stats and found out that Womenpreneur Asia has hit the 10,000 download milestone. To be exact, it's about 10,750 at this point when I'm recording. Now, this was a metric that the 10,000 download metric was the metric that I set for myself even before I started the podcast. So why 10K? It seemed like a nice round number to target, but it was also my way of challenging myself. At that time when I talked about this metric, it was July 2019 in Hawaii. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back to season 1 to the very first episode where I talked about how this podcast came to be. And in Hawaii at that time, I was given just 7 minutes to present my project, which is this podcast. And I had no expectations of myself back then, and I pitched my idea to my Asia Pacific friends, and everyone loved the concept and motivated me to go ahead. Except that, of course, if you listen to that episode, you'll know that I didn't know how. Now, 57 episodes into my podcast with 10,000 downloads, I reflect on how far I've come from zero knowledge of podcasting to arriving at this magic number. I am absolutely grateful. I'm grateful to the women who have heartily opened up to me, and even to some people who refuse to be on my podcast. I've spoken to women in Malaysia, Singapore, Japan, India, Mongolia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Hong Kong. And I've spent more than 100 hours on the phone, on Google Meets, on StreamYard, and StreamYard is where I record all my podcasts. I've done so many pre-interview calls that I can do them with my eyes closed. I used to have 1 hour pre-interview calls. They're now 20 minutes maximum. So it gets easier now that I've had some track record. But in the early days, I think 18 months ago, I was pitching my podcast to potential guests. And it helped that all my entrepreneur friends happily got on board and helped me. They believed in me when I hadn't even had a single episode recorded. And so this introduction episode to season 5, I wanted to just talk about my personal learning and takeaways and what I've learned in the course of creating 57 episodes, talking to countless women, talking to women all over Asia. And I hope to share some of these takeaways with you. And I hope this will be a great way for me to kickstart season 5. So the first thing that I've learned is ask. And I think if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know that I recently wrote an article about the power of the ask. So in my mind, and I've learned this myself over many years, is that if you don't ask, you don't get. Yes, I get rejected, and I will continue to get rejected somehow or other, but throughout the course of doing this podcast is that, of course, some women rejected me and some had interesting reasons. Now, 2 women in China were afraid to speak honestly about the situations, and I had to respect that. And it gave me food for thought. How often do we take our freedom to speak for granted? And of course, there was one woman who was so, I would say, into herself because she had so many media appearances, and she felt that my podcast wasn't good enough for her. So was I upset? Yes. Initially, I was shocked that she could be so presumptuous and nasty when all I wanted was to highlight her story. But I shrugged it off. It's her loss because I will never ask her again. But I also realized that with everything you do in life, you will get rejected. And it's okay. There'll be more yeses than there'll be nos. So asking is one of the key things that I learned about myself when creating and hosting and making this podcast. Now, the second thing is one step at a time. Now, if I think about it, all my fears in the beginning were about how to get the podcast done. We all suffer from this. We get ahead of ourselves and want to start doing and realize we don't have the technical know-how to get things started. And I have been doing digital stuff as long as I can remember, and I'm not afraid of tech. What more if you are not in this industry and have no idea of the tech? What I learned is that if I have a growth mindset, I can learn. It can be tough, but I can always learn. And if I didn't, I could also outsource or delegate it to someone. Were all my episodes perfect? Hell, no. I cringe at the early episodes because I sounded like I was whispering instead of speaking. But I keep them to remind me that I have progressed. I have become more confident as the seasons rolled on. Now, the third thing that I learned is get help and only do what you love best. So for me, creating this podcast, I tried using GarageBand to add music to my podcast in the first episode, and I couldn't do it. I probably had no patience, so I gave the job to a team member who happily did it for me. He also smoothened out the audio. Now, other people helped me with all the audio engineering and combined the intro and outro to the main interview. What I do is what I like to do and can do well, which is editing my interviews, editing the videos, and creating my audiograms. I would like an intern to help me though, so if you know anyone who's great with communications, let me know. Just go to my website, womenpreneurasia.com, and fill up the contact form to let me know if you've got someone who would like to learn as well as help me out in this process. Now, the fourth thing that I learned is find an angle. So my pre-interview calls now are more focused. Besides getting to know the person, I'm also searching for an angle to anchor my interview. Having an angle really enables me to probe deeper and gain insights that add value to you, the listener. It makes the conversation much more meaningful and shines a light on the tough stuff that most people shy away from. And then the other part of it is that questions are only a guide. Some guests ask for a list of questions when we record or before we record. Others simply go with the flow. But my questions are only a guide. An interview is like a tango. I follow where my guest leads me. Her replies prompt the next question. It's more natural this way, and in the earlier episodes, I tried to ask every question I had prepared. By doing so, I lapsed into inattentiveness. Now I listen deeply and try to ask questions that arise in my mind as I hear the answers. The process seems a little organic and messy, but it works. My guests are often more relaxed, and we have a much more empathetic dialogue. Fine-tune as you go along. Now, I'm a big believer in starting at 80% readiness and launching something even if it's not perfect. I used to be worried if something wasn't 100%, but I discovered that there's no 100%, and delaying is simply the fear of not putting your work out there for the world to see. We're all afraid of being judged. Even now, I think someone out there is listening to my podcast. You are listening to my podcast. What will you think of me? Will you like it? Will you hate it? I also know that I can improve once I have launched. I'm still improving my interview skills, my editing skills, my writing, my pitch, my workflow processes from getting on the pre-interview call to recording the episode. I've become more effective in my time now, as many of the processes are either automated, streamlined, or processed using AI. And in this way, I'm really thankful that I'm a digital person. I use Calendly to schedule recording appointments, email templates that I can easily copy, paste, and personalize, Canva to create graphics if I needed to, and lots more. Now, the next thing that I learned is that having fun is key. Creating podcast episodes is actually very fun for me. I love the idea of talking to another woman in business, being inspired by her intelligence, hard work, beliefs, philosophy, and learning from her life experiences. I enjoy creating scalable digital content that others can benefit from. it's really not work because I keep getting inspired each time I record an episode. And when I play back the episode to really go through the edits, I am inspired a second time. So here's my big, hairy, audacious goal: to interview 10,000 Asian women in business. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I know somehow I will, and I will need your help, of course. And even now, I'm thinking of other ways to have fun with this incredible network of women that I know, and I shall keep you posted. And so one of the things that you can do for me is to share this episode or even any episode from Womenpreneur Asia with your friends, whether they're thinking of starting a business, whether they're already in business, whether they want to hear from other women and be inspired by them. Please do me a favor and share this episode with them, or at least let them know that there's such a podcast and they can access this podcast anytime and anywhere they want to. So there you have it. It's all from the heart. I have no PR agency doing this. This is me experimenting, tweaking, growing, and learning as I enjoy my podcasting journey. I'm also considering doing episodes without any guests. Just me, like this, talking about business, marketing, communications, leadership, and all those things that I've learned in the course of not only creating my podcast, but in the course of running my own business, running all the different projects that I run, and all those things that I've learned along the way. So you tell me, is this a good idea? And let me know whether it is directly emailing to me at womenpreneurasia.com at the contact page, or just reach out to me on LinkedIn or any of the social media platforms that you see me on, and let me know if it's a good idea, because I'm seriously tinkering with that idea because I've got so much to share, and I really want to share what I've learned from the women who have been on my podcast, and I want to share from my own personal experiences what I've learned as someone who has tried different things in the course of not just her entrepreneurial life, but also in the times when I was working for others. I spent about 7 years working for others before I ended up in business with my husband. So since I've hit 10K, my next milestone will be, drumroll please, 100K downloads. So I don't know when I'll get there, and I hope to get there soon. But seriously, it's really not even about the downloads. To me, that if you really enjoyed the work, the episodes, the stories, the key takeaways, the uniqueness of every single guest that I've had on my podcast, that really makes me happy. It's not so much about the numbers, even though numbers are fun. Numbers make me happy, but they're not representative of the success of the podcast. To me, the success of a podcast, my podcast particularly, is when I know that I've helped someone, man or woman. I've helped them in the way that I can, using my strengths, using what I can do in terms of interviewing women and learning from them and gaining insights and sharing those insights with you. So I feel that I've done a really good job if my podcast has touched you in any way. Not just touch you, but help you think better about the business that you're running, or even give you ideas and insights about how you could do it better, or even just help you make a new friend, because all my podcast guests have their social media information available, and you can reach out to them anytime that you want to. So thank you so much for listening to this very short but interesting episode, because I consider it as a way for me to announce some very special news. And next week will be the start of season 5 with, again, this season is going to be spectacular. I know I say that every season, but it's going to be spectacular because I'm talking to some really diverse women in really diverse businesses who have really opened up to me in so many ways. So enjoy season 5 and see you next Friday.